Go tell it on the mountain. One of the great songs of faith. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. While shepherds kept their watch o'er silent flocks by night, behold, through the heavens there shone a holy light. Go tell it on the mountain. This song provides the opportunity to tell the story of how singing African American spirituals saved a university. The Fisk Jubilee Singers were founded as a 10-member touring ensemble to raise funds for debt-ridden Fisk University. Taking the entire contents of the university treasury with them for travel expenses, they departed on October 6, 1871, from Nashville on their difficult but ultimately successful campaign. It was an 18-month tour, a triumph that is still celebrated annually as Jubilee Day on that campus. Though not the original repertoire of the group, by the time they reached New York in December of that year, their concerts grew to include more and more spirituals, until their program consisted primarily of choral arrangements of spirituals, or, according to African-American scholar C. Eric Lincoln and Lawrence Mamiya, anthemized spirituals. They have been credited with keeping the Negro spiritual alive. Spiritual scholar Sandra Jean Graham places this development in context. The students were at first reluctant ambassadors for the song of their ancestors. As Jubilee singer Ella Shepard recalls, the slave songs were never used by us, then in public. They were associated with slavery and the dark past and represented the things to be forgotten. Then, too, they were sacred to our parents, who used them in their religious worship. It was only through the persuasion that the students sang their spirituals privately for the university treasurer, George L. White, who was a white man, and through White's coercion that they sang it in concert. Taking the spiritual to white and black audiences in the United States and Europe earned the school and the spiritual an international reputation. The small ensemble of 2 quartets and a pianist grew to a full choral ensemble. Other historical black colleges eventually followed with the same pattern, including Howard University in Washington, D.C., and Tuskegee Institute, now known as Tuskegee University in Tuskegee, Alabama. The earliest version of the spiritual appeared in religious folk songs of the Negro as sung on the plantations, New Edition, 1909, with the heading Christmas Plantation Song, with different stanzas and in slave dialect. When I was a seeker, I sought both night and day. I asked the Lord to help me, and he showed me the way. He made me a watchman upon the city wall, and if I am a Christian, I am the least of all. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. A few smaller and lesser broadly circulated versions use these stanzas or a variation. For example, When I Was a Sinner. African-Canadian composer R. Nathaniel Dett added other harmonizations and stanzas in the volume he edited, Religious Folk Songs of the Negro as Sung at Hampton Institute, 1927. His stanza follows: If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot pray like Paul, you can tell the love of Jesus. You can say he died for all. Dett's stanzas, or some versions of it, is now most commonly associated with the spiritual. There is a balm in Gilead. John Wesley Works, Jr., along with his brother Frederick Jerome Work, from the late 1800s into the early 1900s, led the Fisk Jubilee Singers from 1898 to 1904. Baptist hymnologist William J. Reynolds cites reconciliation by John Wesley Work, Jr.'s son about the role of Go Tell It on the campus. John Wesley Work III took pleasure in recalling his very early days as a child on the campus of Fisk University, where his father was a teacher. Very early on Christmas morning, long before sunrise, it was then the custom for students to gather and walk together from building to building, singing, Go Tell It on the Mountain. Concert arrangements of spirituals were published in Frederick Work's New Jubilee Songs as sung by the Fisk Jubilee Singers in 1902, a collection that may have been co-edited by John Wesley Work, though his name does not appear in this collection. Go Tell It appears in another collection for solo voices, and four-part choir, edited by John Wesley Work III, Work Jr.'s son. In American Negro Songs and Spirituals, a comprehensive collection of 230 folk songs, religious and secular, from 1940. Drawing on an adaptation of the Work Brothers setting, the Pilgrim Hymnal from 1958, edited by Hugh Porter, professor of the Sacred Music Department at Union Seminary in New York, was the first mainline hymnal to include this spiritual. John Wesley Work stanzas based on Luke chapter 2, verses 8 through 20, have become the standard version in hymnals. While shepherds kept their watching. Verse 2, the shepherds feared and trembled. And verse 3, down in a lowly manger. From this hymnal, versions of Go Tell It have spread to the point that it has become one of a canon of spirituals found in virtually every hymnal today. John Wesley Work Jr., sometimes designated John Wesley Work II to distinguish him from his son, received his master's degree from Fisk University, and after further study at Harvard, began teaching Latin and Greek at the university in 1898. He trained the Jubilee Singers and was a leader in preserving and performing African-American spirituals. He taught at Fisk University until 1923, when he was relieved of his duties due to changing attitudes towards the spiritual. He then went on to be president of Roger Williams University in Nashville until his death in 1925. The United Methodist Hymnal editor Carlton R. Young notes African-American theologian James H. Cone's interpretation of the spiritual. Dr. Cone states that the conquering king and the crucified Lord has come to bring peace and justice to the dispossessed of the land. That is why the slaves wanted to go tell it on the mountain. William Farley Smith, who provided arrangements for most of the spirituals in the United Methodist Hymnal, version 1989, adapts Work's arrangements, and according to Dr. Carlton Young, tastefully embellishes the chorus and the end of the verse with a blue note, chromatic turns, and the turn-of-the-century male quartet textures and voice leadings. It improves, but does not abandon Hugh Porter's European setting. Other versions of the spiritual have been adapted to fit specific situations. For example, during the Civil Rights Movement, the following was sung in Alabama. I wouldn't be Governor Wallace. I'll tell you the reason why. I'd be afraid he might call me, and I wouldn't be ready to die. The spiritual has inspired works in other media. Author James Baldwin's first major work and semi-autobiographical novel was entitled Go Tell It on the Mountain, 1953. The novel discusses the role of the paradoxical church as experienced by African Americans, both as the incubator of repression and hypocrisy and as the founder of hope, identity, and community. The ABC network produced a movie using this title in 1984. Regardless of which version that is sung, Go Tell It on the Mountain has become a truly American contribution to the telling of the Christmas story that is now sung around the world.